Hombre.
He didn't say much, he didn't smile, and he sure as hell didn't care what you thought of him. Hombre wasn't just another Western, it was a reckoning. Paul Newman played a white man raised Apache, and the world wasn't ready for what that meant. But behind the dust and moral rot, nothing came easy. The studio wanted a different ending. Newman nearly walked off set, and one actor, he refused to rehearse a single line because he said the character would never practice being cruel. These are 20 weird facts about Hombre. And the bonus? A horse that hated Paul Newman so much, they had to rewrite scenes just to keep the peace. Saddle up. This ride cuts deep.
Hombre means man, and Paul Newman is...
Number 1. Paul Newman didn't want the role. Not at first. He'd just finished Harper, another Martin Ritt collaboration, and he was exhausted, burned out from back-to-back productions, press tours, the relentless machinery of stardom grinding him down. The studio sent him Elmore Leonard's novel, and Newman read it twice, then put it down. Too quiet, he said, too internal. The character barely spoke, lived on the margins, carried trauma like a second skin. Newman thought it was brilliant, but he didn't see himself in it. He was Paul Newman, blue-eyed charm, the guy who could sell rebellion with a smile. John Russell was the opposite of that, a man hardened by rejection, shaped by violence, fluent in a culture that white America despised. Then Ritt called him, not to pitch, not to convince, just to talk. They met at Newman's house in Connecticut, drank beer on the porch while the sun went down, and Ritt said one thing that changed everything. You've played heroes, you've played rebels, you've played men the world loves, but you've never played a man the world doesn't want. Newman stared at him for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and told his agent he was in. No negotiation, no script changes, no questions, just yes. Because sometimes the role you don't want is the one you need, the one that strips away everything comfortable and asks who you really are underneath. Number 2. The script went through absolute hell before cameras rolled. Elmore Leonard's novel was lean, brutal, morally complex. Everything a great Western should be. Sharp dialogue, no wasted words, characters who lived in shades of gray. But the first screenplay, written by the talented husband and wife team Irving Ravitch and Harriet Frank Jr., softened it. Not out of malice, out of fear. They added romance, lightened the ending, gave John Russell more traditionally heroic moments, more speeches, more chances to explain himself. They turned rough edges smooth. Martin Ritt read it in his office and threw it across the room, pages scattering like tumbleweed. He called them that night and said, "This isn't Hombre. This is Hollywood scared of itself. This is what we do when we don't trust the audience to handle the truth." So they started over, stripped out the sentiment like pulling teeth, put the racism back in, the slurs, the casual cruelty that white characters used like breathing, made the ending hurt again, made it matter. The studio panicked when they read the revision. They said audiences wouldn't accept a Western where the hero dies and nothing changes, where sacrifice doesn't redeem anyone, where the world stays broken. Ritt didn't blink. He told them in a meeting that became legendary, "Then you've got the wrong director. Fire me now or shut up and let me make the movie." They backed down. And the script that almost got buried, that almost became another safe, forgettable Western, became one of the most unflinching, uncompromising genre films ever made. Number 3. Paul Newman prepared for the role like he was shedding a skin. He didn't just research Apache culture, he lived in it, or as close as a movie star could get in 1966. For weeks before filming, he stayed in Arizona, away from hotels and Hollywood comfort. He learned tracking from a Navajo guide, studied silence, watched how men moved when words didn't matter, when language itself was a luxury. He cut his hair short, military style, brutal and blunt, stopped shaving for days at a time until his face looked weathered and hard, wore the same clothes until they stank, until they felt like they belonged to someone else, someone harder. He wanted to feel like an outsider, even off camera, wanted to carry that weight in his body, in his posture, in the way he looked at people. His co-stars barely recognized him when he showed up for the first table read at Fox. The charm was gone, the smile was buried. He sat in the corner, didn't make small talk, didn't crack jokes or tell stories like he usually did. He just watched everyone with flat, measuring eyes. Someone, maybe Barbara Rush, asked if he was okay. Newman just looked at her and said, "John Russell wouldn't be," and he meant it. He stayed in that headspace for the entire shoot. Quiet, distant, uncomfortable in rooms full of people. Not because he was being method or pretentious, because he understood something fundamental. Some characters don't get to relax. They don't get to turn it off. And if he was going to do this right, neither would he. For 2 months, Paul Newman disappeared, and John Russell took his place.
Stranger who needed killing.
Smoke bother you?
Number 4. Richard Boone was supposed to be the easy hire. He was a Western veteran, a television icon from Have Gun Will Travel, a man who understood villains from the inside out. He'd played lawmen and outlaws, heroes and monsters, all with the same cold professionalism. But when he showed up to set in Arizona, tanned and smoke-weathered, he refused to rehearse. Not out of ego, not out of laziness, out of pure philosophical conviction. He told Rit in front of the entire cast, "Cicero Grimes doesn't practice. He doesn't run lines in a mirror. He just does. Cruelty isn't something you prepare for. It's something you carry." Rit was furious at first. He ran a tight ship, believed in preparation, in craft, in treating filmmaking like architecture. So while the rest of the cast ran lines, worked out blocking and timed their reactions, Boone sat alone under a cottonwood tree, smoking cigars, studying the landscape, watching vultures circle. He looked like he was napping. He looked like he didn't care, but he was working, just in his own way. Then came Boone's first take. The cruelty wasn't performed. It wasn't theatrical or exaggerated. It was lived. He delivered every vicious line like he'd been saying it his whole life. No hesitation, no indication he thought it was wrong. Just cold, casual evil. The kind that doesn't announce itself. After that first take, Rit walked over, looked at Boone for a long moment and said, "Never rehearse again. Just show up. Some actors need preparation. Others just need permission to be dangerous." And Boone was the second kind. Number 5. The stagecoach wasn't a prop. It was a 90-year-old relic pulled from a museum in Tucson, rebuilt by hand and barely functional. The wheels wobbled. The suspension was completely shot. The interior smelled like rotting leather, dust, and something older, something that might have been death. But Rit insisted on using it because he didn't want comfort. He wanted the actors to feel every bump, every jostle, every moment of authentic discomfort. And they did. Fredric March, playing the corrupt Indian agent Alexander Favor, was 70 years old and spent hours crammed inside that rattling death trap under the Arizona sun. The coach had no shock absorption, no padding. Every rock in the road went straight through the wood into their spines. Between takes, March would step out, stretch his back with both hands pressed against his kidneys, and mutter to anyone listening, "This is what I get for not retiring. This is my punishment for vanity." But on camera, you could see it in his face. Real exhaustion, real irritation, real claustrophobia. The stagecoach wasn't just a setting or a mode of transportation. It was a co-star that made everyone miserable, that ground them down hour after hour, and Rit loved every second of it. He'd watch the playback and smile because what he saw wasn't acting, it was survival. And that's what Hombre was really about.
Billy Lee, what's your last name?
Number 6. Diane Cilento brought fire to a role that could have been forgettable. She played Jessie, the boarding house woman with a sharp tongue, sharper survival instincts, and absolutely no patience for men's delusions. But the studio wanted someone softer, more traditionally beautiful, someone who could sell posters and magazine covers. They pushed for a bigger name, threw out suggestions like Joanne Woodward or even Elizabeth Taylor if they could afford her. Rit refused them all. He wanted Cilento specifically because she didn't care about being liked. She'd just come off brutal divorce proceedings with Sean Connery, tabloid chaos, public mess, her name dragged through mud by people who didn't know her, and she channeled all of that rage, all of that betrayal, all of that hard-earned cynicism into Jessie. Every bitter line reading, every hard stare, every moment of defiance. She didn't play a victim waiting to be saved. She played a survivor who'd run out of patience for everyone's bullshit, who saw through every lie, every performance, every attempt at charm. Newman later said in an interview that working with her was like sparring with a knife. You never knew when she'd cut you, but you respected the hell out of her for trying. On set, she intimidated half the cast. She didn't socialize, she didn't apologize, she just did the work and went home. And the performance she gave, angry and vulnerable and refusing to soften for anyone, became the moral center of the film, the person who saw Russell for who he actually was. Number 7. The Arizona heat was unbearable. Filming took place in summer, June through August, temperatures pushing 110 degrees in the shade, and there wasn't much shade. No air conditioning, no modern cooling systems, just wet bandanas and prayer. The crew wore cowboy hats soaked in water. Actors gulped from canteens between takes, shirts stained with salt rings. And Paul Newman, dressed in dark wool pants and a leather vest, barely complained. He just endured. But there was one scene, a long walk through open desert while carrying a wounded man, where he nearly collapsed. The cameras kept rolling because Rit wanted the exhaustion to be real. Newman kept walking, one foot in front of the other, face getting paler with each step. His breathing got shallow. His legs started shaking. And just as Rit was about to call cut, Newman stopped, bent over at the waist, and threw up, violently. The cameras cut. The crew rushed in with water. Newman wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, straightened up slowly, and said, "Again." Rit told him they had enough footage. Newman shook his head. John Russell wouldn't stop, so neither do I. They shot it 3 more times in that killing heat, and in the final cut, you can see everything. The exhaustion, the dehydration, the stubborn refusal to quit even when your body is begging you to lie down. It wasn't acting, it was endurance, and it was beautiful in a brutal sort of way.
You gonna go down there? This one won't. That's his wife, but he won't do it.
Number 8. Fredric March was Hollywood royalty, a 2-time Oscar winner, a man who'd worked with everyone from Ernst Lubitsch to William Wyler. He'd survived silent films, conquered talkies, and reinvented himself decade after decade. And on the set of Hombre, he was a functional nightmare, not because he was difficult or demanding, but because he was drunk. Quietly, professionally, but undeniably drunk. He'd show up late, sometimes an hour, sometimes 2, slurring lines, reeking of whiskey that no amount of mouthwash could hide. Rit confronted him after the 3rd day in his trailer. Expected denial, excuses, apologies. March didn't offer any of those. He just looked at Rit and said, "I'm playing a man who sold out his soul for money, who betrayed everything he was supposed to protect. You think that kind of rot comes from sobriety? You think I can pretend that with a clear head?" Rit didn't have an answer for that, so they made a deal, quietly, never written down. March could drink, but only after lunch, and it worked. Mornings, he was sharp, professional, hitting every mark, delivering clean takes. Afternoons, he was loose, dangerous, unpredictable. His eyes got mean, his voice got harder, and somehow, the two halves created one of the most complex villains in Western history. A man you hated for his weakness and almost pitied for his self-awareness. March knew exactly what he was, and that knowledge was killing him, on screen and off. Number 9. The final standoff wasn't in the original script. In Leonard's novel, the ending was quieter, more ambiguous, more literary. Russell just disappeared from the narrative, his fate implied but never shown. But Rit felt the film needed punctuation, something visual and violent, something that hurt you to watch. So he and the writers crafted the scene where Russell sacrifices himself, not for glory or redemption, not to prove anything or win anyone's love, but simply because someone had to. Because leaving people to die when you could save them, that wasn't something he could live with. The studio hated it. They wanted Russell to survive, ride off into some kind of future, maybe even get the girl, maybe even find peace. Test audiences agreed. They said it was too dark, too depressing, that people wanted hope. Rit told them flatly, "This isn't that kind of Western. This is the one where doing the right thing costs you everything, where sacrifice doesn't redeem anyone, where the world stays broken even after the hero dies." They threatened to replace him, brought in another director to consult. Rit threatened to quit, to take his name off the film completely, and Newman backed him up. Said publicly if they changed the ending, he'd walk too, and he'd make sure everyone knew why. The studio blinked, and the ending stayed. Dark, uncompromising, devastating. A bullet in the back, a body in the dirt, and a world that keeps turning without noticing, because sometimes the hero doesn't win, he just runs out of time, and nobody remembers his name. Number 10. There was a horse on set that hated Paul Newman. No one knew why. Maybe the smell of his cologne, maybe the energy he carried, maybe just cosmic bad luck. But every time Newman approached, the horse would rear back, snap its teeth, try to bite or kick. The animal handlers couldn't explain it. They tried different approaches, different handlers, even brought in an animal behaviorist from the university who watched for 2 days and finally said, "Some animals just don't like certain people. It's chemistry." So they had to rewrite scenes, swap horses mid-shot for certain angles, use camera tricks and doubles to make it look like Newman was riding, when he was actually on a different horse entirely, or sometimes just standing still while the background moved. It added days to the schedule, cost thousands in reshoots. At one point, standing in the corral watching the horse deliberately turn away from him, Newman joked to the crew, "Even the animals know I'm not a real cowboy. They can smell the movie star." Everyone laughed, but the truth was, it bothered him deeply. He prided himself on preparation, on earning respect from everyone on set, human or animal. He'd learned to ride, learned to move like a man raised in the wilderness. And this horse, with its flat black eyes and pinned back ears, it saw right through all of it. In a movie about a man caught between two worlds, accepted by neither, maybe that horse knew something the rest of them didn't. Maybe it was the most honest critic on set. Number 11. The sound design almost destroyed the film. Hombre was shot mostly on location in Arizona, which meant wind. Constant, howling, microphone-killing wind. The sound recordist, a veteran named Harold Lewis, fought it every day with foam, with positioning, with prayer. But when they got into post-production and started mixing, they realized half the dialogue was unusable, buried under wind noise, crunching gravel, the rattle of that ancient stagecoach. The studio wanted to loop everything, have the actors come back and re-record all their lines in a quiet booth. But Rit refused. He said the imperfection was the point, that the struggle to hear, the harshness of the environment, it was all part of the experience. So the sound team spent months salvaging what they could, filtering, isolating, rebuilding. They mixed the film like archaeologists, digging for fragments of performance buried under layers of natural chaos. Some lines are still hard to hear, some words get lost in the wind, and Rit kept it that way. Because Hombre wasn't supposed to be easy or comfortable. It was supposed to feel like survival, and sometimes survival means you don't catch every word. You just catch enough to understand the world once you're gone.
Maybe it was the woman tethered like an animal.
Number 12. Barbara Rush had one of the toughest roles in the film and almost no one talks about it. She played Audra Favor, the Indian agent's wife, a woman who starts the film wrapped in privilege and ends it stripped of everything, including dignity. It's a performance built entirely on humiliation, on watching someone's carefully constructed identity crumble in real time. And Rush, who was used to playing elegant leading ladies in Technicolor melodramas, found it excruciating. She told an interviewer years later that every day on set felt like peeling away a layer of her own protection, her own vanity. The scene where she's forced to walk through the desert in her undergarments, that wasn't done with body doubles or clever angles. That was her, walking in the heat, while the camera captured every moment of vulnerability and shame. Rit didn't protect her from it. He pushed her into it. After one particularly brutal take, she walked off set crying, not from the physical discomfort, but from the emotional exposure. Newman followed her, said something quietly that no one else heard. She came back 10 minutes later and finished the scene. Rush never said what Newman told her, but whatever it was, it worked, because what she gave the film was raw, honest, devastating. A portrait of privileged learning it was never real to begin with. Number 13. Martin Ritt and Paul Newman had a system, a language between them that no one else on set fully understood. They'd worked together before on HUD, developed a shorthand, a way of communicating with glances and half-sentences. During Hombre, they barely spoke. Ritt would watch a take, walk over to Newman, and just nod, or shake his head, or tilt his chin slightly to the left, and Newman would understand completely. Do it softer, do it harder, do it again, but this time don't look at her. The rest of the cast found it mystifying, sometimes frustrating. Boone once asked Ritt what direction he'd given Newman between takes. Ritt just smiled and said, "None of your business." It wasn't about excluding people, it was about trust. Ritt knew Newman could translate anything, could find the emotion or the stillness or the violence in a single gesture, and Newman trusted Ritt enough to be completely vulnerable, to try things that might not work, to fail in front of everyone. That silent partnership, built on respect and years of collaboration, became the invisible foundation of the film. You can't see it, but you can feel it in every frame. Two artists so in sync they didn't need words, which was perfect for a movie about a man who barely spoke. Number 14. The town of Contention, where most of the interior scenes were filmed, didn't exist. Not really. It was built from scratch on a Fox backlot, designed to look like a dying frontier town where hope went to fade. The production designer, Jack Martin Smith, filled it with details that would never be seen on camera, but made the actors feel like they were somewhere real. Wanted posters with actual faces, store signs with faded paint, a saloon with bottles that had real liquid in them. He wanted the world to feel lived in, worn down by time and disappointment, and it worked. The actors walked through those streets between setups and they believed in the place. They moved differently, talked differently. Even in their downtime, they stayed in character because the environment demanded it. But there was a problem. The town was so convincing, so detailed, that tourists started showing up at the studio gates asking for directions to Contention, thinking it was a real historical site they could visit. Fox had to put up signs explaining it wasn't real, but in a way, it was. Because for 2 months in 1966, Contention existed. People lived there, died there, and then when filming wrapped, they tore it all down, loaded it onto trucks, and Contention disappeared like it had never been, just like the real towns it was based on. Number 15. There's a scene midway through the film where the stagecoach passengers debate what to do about Russell, whether to trust him or abandon him. It was written as straightforward dialogue, people arguing positions. But when they shot it, something unexpected happened. The actors started overlapping, talking over each other, interrupting, the way real people actually argue. Ritt loved it. He told the script supervisor to stop correcting them, to let it happen organically. They did 6 takes and everyone was different. Different rhythms, different escalations, different moments of tension. In the editing room, Ritt cut between all 6 takes, building a scene that felt chaotic and real and uncomfortable. You can't always tell who's speaking. Some lines get cut off mid-sentence. It breaks every rule of clean dialogue editing. And it's one of the most powerful scenes in the film because it doesn't feel performed. It feels captured, like the camera accidentally witnessed something it wasn't supposed to see. Modern filmmakers call it overlapping dialogue or ensemble improvisation and treat it like innovation. But Ritt was doing it in 1966, quietly, without announcing it as technique. He just called it letting actors be human. Number 16. The cinematographer James Wong Howe was 67 years old and one of the most respected cameramen in Hollywood history. He'd shot everything from silent films to film noir to Technicolor epics. But Hombre might have been his greatest challenge because Ritt wanted it to look like nothing else. Not pretty, not romantic, just true. Howe used harsh overhead lighting that created deep shadows under eyes and cheekbones, making everyone look older, harder, more desperate. He avoided the golden hour magic that most westerns relied on. Instead, he shot in the flat, brutal light of midday when the desert looked bleached and hostile. He used longer lenses than usual, compressing the space, making the characters feel trapped even in open landscapes, and he refused to use any filtration on Newman's face. No soft focus, no diffusion, nothing to hide the dirt or sweat or exhaustion. Newman was the biggest star in the world, and Howe made him look ordinary, worn. Howe later said that was the hardest part, convincing Newman to trust him, to let go of vanity entirely. But Newman did, and the result is a film that doesn't look like 1967. It looks like 1887. Like someone found a box of photographs from the actual frontier and turned them into a movie. Howe was nominated for an Oscar for his work. He didn't win, but the film looks immortal anyway. Number 17. There was almost a completely different ending shot, and it still exists somewhere in a vault. After test screenings where audiences reacted negatively to Russell's death, the studio panicked and demanded Ritt shoot an alternate version where Russell survives. Ritt refused. They threatened him. He still refused. so they went around him. They brought in a second unit director, built a small set, and filmed an ending where Russell walks away wounded but alive, disappearing into the distance while Jesse watches. They cut it into the film and showed it to another test audience. The scores went up. People said they liked it better. They felt hopeful. The studio was thrilled. This was the version they wanted to release. But Ritt found out. He went directly to Newman, and Newman, who had final cut approval buried in his contract, killed it. He told the studio, "Release the real ending or I'll sue you and tell the press you butchered the film." They backed down again. The alternate ending was shelved, locked away, never seen publicly. But it exists. Somewhere in the Fox archives there's a version of Hombre where the hero survives and the story lies to you. And every few years, film historians try to find it. Not because they think it's better, but because they want to see what the film would have been if fear had won. If Newman and Ritt had given up, but they didn't, and that matters more than any footage in a vault. Number 18. The film opened in March 1967 to mixed reviews. Critics didn't know what to do with it. It was too dark for audiences expecting a traditional Western, too quiet for people wanting action, too angry for people wanting escape. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times called it well-made but unpleasant. Other critics praised the performances but questioned the ending, the bleakness, the refusal to offer comfort. The box office was decent, but not spectacular. It made its money back, but didn't explode into a cultural phenomenon. For a while, it looked like Hombre would be forgotten, just another Western that came and went. But something strange happened. Over the years, over decades, the film's reputation grew. Critics reassessed it. Film students studied it. Other directors cited it as an influence. Clint Eastwood said it was one of the reasons he made Unforgiven. The Coen brothers watched it before making True Grit, and slowly, quietly, Hombre became recognized as one of the most important Westerns ever made. Not because it was popular, because it was honest. It didn't give you what you wanted, it gave you what you needed. And sometimes the greatest films are the ones that take 50 years to be understood. Number 19. Paul Newman never fully left the character behind. For years after Hombre, people close to him said something had changed. He was quieter in interviews, more selective about roles, more interested in characters who lived in moral gray zones. He turned down big-budget spectacles and easy paydays. He chased smaller, darker, more difficult films. Cool Hand Luke came next, another collaboration with an uncompromising director, another role about a man the system couldn't break. Then Butch Cassidy, where even in a crowd-pleasing buddy western, his character ends up dead in a freeze frame. He spent the rest of his career building on what Hombre taught him, that the most interesting characters aren't the ones who win, they're the ones who refuse to surrender even when losing is inevitable. In interviews late in his life, Newman would mention Hombre unprompted. He'd call it one of the roles he was most proud of, not because it was successful or popular, but because it cost him something. Because he had to become someone harder, lonelier, more honest than he'd ever been on screen. And once you've been that honest, once you've stripped away all the charm and protection, you can't fully go back. John Russell stayed with Paul Newman for the rest of his life, not as a haunting, as a compass.
And Paul Newman is Hombre.
Number 20. Martin Ritt fought with studios his entire career. He was blacklisted in the 1950s, came back angry, made films about injustice and hypocrisy and the ways systems crush individuals. But Hombre was different. It wasn't just another film for him, it was personal. Ritt had grown up poor, Jewish, an outsider in every room he entered. He understood what it meant to be John Russell, to live between worlds, accepted by neither, surviving on stubbornness alone. After Hombre wrapped, Ritt told his wife it was the first time he'd made exactly the film he wanted to make, with no compromises, no studio notes that mattered, no softening of the message. He knew it might hurt his career, he knew audiences might reject it, but he didn't care because some stories have to be told the way they need to be told, not the way people want to hear them. Ritt went on to make other great films, Norma Ray, Sounder, The Front, but none of them cut as deep as Hombre. None of them asked as much of their audience, and none of them showed as clearly what Rit believed in his bones, that this country was built on people like John Russell, outsiders and outcasts who held the line when everyone else ran, and when they died, nobody bothered to learn their names. The film was Rit's requiem for all of them. The forgotten ones, the inconvenient heroes, the people the history books erased.